So, from my year of trying to read the classics comes this book. What do you mean you can't see what it is? Of course you can see what it is. It is Travels with Charley by Steinbeck. Now, I have never had a good relationship with Steinbeck. It started early with The Red Pony, way too early. I was in my early teens and I loved horses, and The Red Pony scarred me, and it scarred me for life. Over the years I tried to read another couple of Steinbecks, never with any success. I think I tried Cannery Row, might have been Cannery Row, Mice and Men, a couple of them. Anyway, it was usually because someone was trying to make me read them. I've never finished it. I had never finished a single one before I finished Travels with Charley. I was determined to read a Steinbeck for my year of reading the classics, because you can't mention American literature with someone saying John Steinbeck. But I couldn't quite decide which one. I wasn't enthusiastic really about any of them. Travels with Charley, however, I already possessed. I inherited it from my mother. It was her favourite Steinbeck. She enjoyed it immensely and read it a few times. She always tried to get me to read it, and I never did. Graceless child that I was. It is quite a beautiful book. Back in the 1950s, I assume, Steinbeck got a travelling van, long before #van life, and started travelling around America. His goal, as stated, was to see more of Middle America that he thought he'd lost touch with over a couple of decades of writing. I think he was in his late 50s when he did this. And he travelled with Charley, who was his French poodle. There's a rather cute photo of them at the back of the book. So obviously a full-size dog rather than a handbag poodle like we see more commonly these days. But yeah, so they travelled around America. And I actually didn't hate this book. I quite enjoyed it. I loved the descriptions of travelling around. Nothing horrible happened for most of the book, which I think is pretty rare with Steinbeck. He seems to rely on the horrible. So travelling around America with no fanfare and no fuss. And it was exciting in a mild way and quite beautifully written. So I enjoyed that. I love the fact that he was ahead of the crowd and was already travelling decades before anyone made it popular. It's an interesting travelogue in its own right, because since his purpose was to discover the real America, he went to unusual places. And because he is undeniably a brilliant author, just not one I enjoy, it's a very quotable book. You can find a quoted page pretty much. And one of my favourites was from page 162, where he says, "I wonder why progress looks so much like destruction." It could be the epitaph for modern life. So the destruction he was seeing was that there was a lot of habitat destruction, there was a lot of erosion, and social erosion particularly was what interested him. So it was the erosion of small communities and the distinctnesses of small towns as people moved into the cities. He didn't much like cities by the sound of it. He seemed to think they were too big, too homogeneous, and generally unpleasant. But for all the things that he saw about America being overdeveloped and too big, to our eyes, reading from the now, he was travelling through an immensely bucolic and antiquated style of America. It seems quaint and cute, even while he's complaining and grizzling at how little it's retained of its autonomy. Well, on page 25, he mourns the mountains of waste that the country is producing with no effort to recycle or reuse. And he was a bit ahead of his time on that one as well. He had high expectations of Europe, so he thought Europe would be doing better than America, and arguably it is. But the whole world pretty much is now drowning in oceans and mountains of waste, single-use stuff that no one is attempting to recycle and use efficiently. At least no one with enough power to do so. So he was ahead of his curve there. I enjoyed this book, but I have to say I didn't adore it. I am not going to go out and buy every single Steinbeck ever written. He's not now my favourite author. I respect him as an author. I like what he did, but my adoration is not there. And I think that comes down to the fact that Steinbeck is quintessentially an American author. He writes about America. He's concerned about America. America runs through his bones and through his books. And I am just, with all due respect to my American friends, I'm just not that into America. I don't care that much. And we're already drowning in mountains of books of Americana, and every movie you see, unless you go to tiny cinema, is drowning in more Americana. And I was just never that interested to begin with, and so I already see more than enough of it. So I don't think Steinbeck is one that I'm going to be running out to reread, and I am never going anywhere near The Red Pony. Still scarred for life on that one. So Steinbeck, however, does care very deeply about America, and so he writes about it lyrically, and it's beautiful to see his emotion and compassion for the country, and his descriptive powers all go toward making it sound wonderful and fascinating. He does assume that everyone knows as much about America as he does, so I was often lost, both geographically and culturally. Geographically didn't matter. I've got Google Maps. I could bring up a map and try and figure out what the hell he was talking about. Culturally, I just couldn't be bothered to Google, even if I could figure out what I needed to Google to understand what he was talking about. So there was social dissonance there that I normally didn't understand. Texas especially suffered from that because Texas is a large part of the book. And Steinbeck tells me that Texas is a huge part of the American psyche. You don't say. He doesn't tell me why, though. He just tells me that everything that I thought I knew about Texas is wrong. And since I thought almost nothing about Texas, that part didn't rock my world. Toward the end is the bit that left the most impression. He went to New Orleans. Can't do it. Anyway, he describes the racial divide of black and white, which was quite acute there. It was probably acute in other places, but he waits until the New Orleans section to really get into it. It's interesting to know that people still alive will remember the level of apartheid that existed. One thinks of that as historical, but it's not. It's fairly recent, and it's quite horrific. And of all the things I read about it that really were shudder-worthy, I'm going to just mention one here. Apparently, there were these things called cheerleaders. These women used to stand outside racially integrated schools and hurl abuse at the children, mind you, who were enrolled in these schools as they were coming and going. They would just stand there and say the most disgusting things that would be edited out of YouTube if I tried to repeat them. Not that I'm going to. And they would be egged on by the crowds who loved watching these women abuse children. Pause for thought on that one. There's so many problems in America today, and I think reading this section on things that were happening in the lifetime of people walking around today, that really gives you a context for where some of them have come from. Anyway, so plenty of fascinating things about America. It's a beautifully written book. It is quite lovely. I don't know if it's his only non-fiction. I know it was one of the ones written toward the end of his life. He is an amazing author. It's a shame that he's not really for me, but I'm not going to rule out maybe reading another one of his books in the future. I will probably reread this one again, though, because it is quite lovely.